In Canada, you have a constitutionally protected right to complain about your university professors and to complain about the quality of the courses that you're enrolled in. And there's a recent High Court precedent backing up that right, not just in theory, but in practice. As important as that right may be, I use it very judiciously. I actually very rarely complain here on my YouTube channel, on my blog, or elsewhere about particular professors. I very rarely criticize them. And that's because in the university context, believe it or not, I'm a natural conformist. I have a great deal in common with my professors. I very often like them as people, even if I think they're bad professors. Several of the university professors in Asian studies at UVic went out to dinner with me, took me out for coffee, talked to me about their personal lives, not just their research, but their marriages and divorces. Many of these people really were my personal friends. That was the case at University of Regina before, and so on and so forth. Even at University of Toronto, there were professors I related to personally and got along well with, even if I thought they were doing a very poor job in teaching their courses, in their conduct, as educators. So I'm actually not the sort of character who would abuse this constitutionally protected freedom. But it's important to note that this freedom doesn't require you to be reasonable. It doesn't require you to use polite language. And it very definitely protects you as a student against the tendency of university professors and administrators to punish you or to try to intimidate you into silence if you dare to criticize your professors or if you dare to discuss on the internet publicly how poor the quality of education you're receiving may well be. I just received a really nasty email from Professor Annalee Lepp, and I interpret this email, you'll see it in just a moment, I interpret this as trying to intimidate me into silence, trying to dissuade me from complaining about the quality of the courses at UVic and complaining about the conduct of a particular professor. Dr. Annalee Lepp is the kind of person I would probably enjoy eating lunch with and having a conversation about common research interests. She probably didn't read my CV. She probably didn't read my resume before sending me this email. But you know what? Dr. Annalee Lepp has a distinguished career in researching prostitution, human trafficking, etc. in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Southeast Asia. She has a research institute based in Bangkok dealing with women's rights, prostitution, human trafficking, sex slavery. Those are all issues I did years of research on, I have several publications on, and that I was employed in NGO, charity, nonprofit sector research on, and that I also worked as an editor of academic nonfiction on. I've done a lot of reading in that area. I've done a lot of travel and had a lot of direct experience and picked up anecdotes from talking to other researchers. Probably, she may not realize it, Dr. Annalee Lepp would probably enjoy sitting down and having a casual conversation with me about past research experience.
I think we need to take a really evidence-based approach to thinking about what does it mean for someone to be trafficked.
The head of the department currently, Professor Richard Fox, who's never had a conversation with me, his career began studying Buddhism and Sanskrit. Well, I have more than 10 years behind me. Within Buddhism, I worked more on Theravada Buddhism, thus Pali was my language of scholarship. I really did learn to read and write Pali, this ancient language. I did years of research on Theravada Buddhism in Southeast Asia, again, including Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, but also Sri Lanka, Myanmar, a little bit different geographical division. So, Guy, we're not natural enemies in many ways in terms of past research interest. We would be natural friends. But if you give these people administrative duties and you give them management problems, very often they will respond to that incredibly negatively and with frustration, and they will be punitive, and they will abuse the tiny amount of authority they have over students. And why? Partly because the educational background they have is not in management. Dr. Annalee Lepp, so she works in gender studies, women's studies, history, etc. From my perspective, politics also, right? But she's not someone whose education and training prepared her to deal with a managerial problem like a conflict between a student and a professor, or maybe one professor and another professor, the type of management issues that inevitably and inexorably are part of having a large multi-million-dollar university institution, right? Richard Fox, I could say something similar. Writing an examination about Sanskrit and ancient Buddhism doesn't prepare you to deal with this situation we're in right now. And that's why having constitutional protection for students' rights is so important. Here's an anonymously authored article from The Gauntlet in 2011. Keith and Stephen Pridgeon took a Law Society course in 2007 taught by Arunya Mitra. After the course was over, a student started a Facebook page called, quote, I no longer fear hell, I took a course with Arunya Mitra, on which both of the Pridgeon brothers commented. According to students who took the class, Mitra, who was teaching the class for the first time, claimed that she was a full-time professor when in fact she was only a sessional instructor. She also made wildly inaccurate statements like claiming that the Magna Carta was an agreement between First Nations people and the government. The Pridgeons brothers and other members of the class were called for a U of C disciplinary hearing where Keith was put on probation for 24 months and both were ordered to never again post defamatory material about a member of the university community. The case went to real court, where a Court of Queen's Bench judge ruled that the U of C lacks the right to prevent students from commenting on the quality of instruction they receive because the Charter of Rights and Freedoms protects freedom of speech. And again, let's face it, it's much more meaningful, it's much more important that university students can criticize the university than it is important for you and I to be able to criticize a restaurant or a shoe store if we are dissatisfied with what we've managed to purchase there. There is to some extent a clientelistic relationship between professor and student, but there are much more meaningful, much more important things. The stakes are really very high, including for the future career of these students. The Wikipedia article, if you look at the top half here, underlined in red, I'm just drawing attention to how universities in Canada will often try to intimidate students into silence with charges that are wildly irrelevant to their actual conduct. When you look at the definition of so-called non-academic misconduct, this is supposed to be punishing students for like stealing, unauthorized removal and or possession of university property. This wasn't written at all to dissuade students from criticizing their professors or complaining about the quality of courses. And yet, that is the purpose this was put to. The tiny amount of power that professors have in positions of administration and management then gets wielded against students in this really fundamentally immoral and, I may say, unconstitutional way. The Court of the Queen's Bench of Alberta found the University of Calgary to be wrong in prosecuting 10 students, including the Pridgeon brothers, in regard to the comments made about a professor on Facebook. The key ruling in this case was that the universities are not exempt from, and these students were in fact protected under, Section 2B of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Okay, so what was the conflict? What was the criticism I dared to offer? What was the complaint that resulted in these professors trying to intimidate me into silence? You all want to know. Here we go. Take a look. Professor Tian, I am requesting a meeting with you to set the teacher-pupil relationship on a better basis for the future. The last time we had a meeting in your office was in 2015. Your behavior at that meeting was so negative that it had tremendous impact on the next 5 years of my life. I think you genuinely do not know how negative those long-term impacts have been. Please take a few minutes to speak to me positively to set the relationship on a more positive basis as I am now returning to UVic. Attached to this email is a sample of my Chinese handwriting in two very different contexts, one careful and slow, the other rapid and slapdash. Did I receive a reply from the professor I wrote to, from Professor Tian? No. Did I receive a reply from Professor Fox, the head of the department? No. Professor Fox only wrote back to inform me that he was going to have to refer such a serious matter to the Dean of Humanities. And here's the intimidating email I received from the Dean. Please compare this to the response you get to any kind of customer service complaint where you are a customer spending tens of thousands of dollars on the product. In this case, an education that cannot lead to any kind of employment for me whatsoever. In response to your email, I refer back to the letter you received from Dr. John Archibald, Dean of the Humanities in 2015. In that email, Dr. Archibald indicated the investigation of your complaints and the responses to them had been concluded. Dr. Archibald also stated that further repetition of these complaints to your instructors or to the chair crosses the line to harassment with the attendant consequences detailed in that letter. Do you notice a slight mismatch between the letter I sent to the professor and this threat? It's not a veiled threat. It's not an implied threat. This direct threat I received from the dean that I'm somehow doing something immoral that I will be punished for in quote-unquote repeating complaints to instructor. Sorry, was there even a complaint in the message that I sent to Professor Jun Tian? Was that a complaint? I think I sent a letter saying, hey, look, let's try to set this relationship on a more positive basis if we're actually going to be in the classroom together and we're actually going to be working together. And now you're telling me something that was addressed, debunked, and resolved back in 2015. You're telling me that if I dare to complain about the content or quality of the courses I'm in, if I dare to complain about a professor, that would cross the line into harassment. You're dead wrong, Professor Annalee Lepp. You're dead wrong. On the contrary, that's my constitutionally protected right. And that precedent in court proves I don't have to use polite language. I don't have to write in an academic style or publish in an academic journal. I can make such outrageous statements as complaining that a course is worse than going to hell. That was even in the title of that Facebook group. I'm allowed to have just as much freedom of speech as a sports commentator complaining about the pitcher in a baseball game. I'm allowed to use all the shocking and lurid metaphors of someone writing a column in the local newspaper. I have full freedom of speech, period, protected under the Constitution of this country. And you tell me, Professor Annalee Lepp, do you think we would be living in a better world if I did not have that freedom of speech? Do you think we'd be living in a better world if you and Professor Jun Tian and Professor Richard Fox succeeded in intimidating students like myself into silence? I think that would be a worse world for us all.